When you're harvesting your cucumber crops, the last thing you want are these big, gnarly yellow and orange cucumbers. But when you want the seed, this is exactly what you should look for. Join me today as I show you how to collect and save cucumber seeds. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott. Summer is over, my cucumber plants have faded, and it's the ideal time to collect the fruit to save the seed. Now, as with most seed in our garden, we want it to be as mature as possible. And when we're saving the seed that's inside a fruit, we need the fruit to be as mature as possible. And cucumbers are typically harvested very young. We want them green and sweet and small. And so, believe it or not, this cucumber right here is a Boston pickling cucumber. It's normally going to be just a couple inches long when we harvest it. But when we allow it to stay on the vine, it will continue to grow. It will mature and it will change color to this yellow or almost orange color. And it's at this point that we harvest it to save the seed. I was harvesting these cucumbers regularly, but about midsummer, the plant began to fade and I allowed some of the cucumbers to remain and grow. And as they stay on the plant and they get that extra 4 or 5 or 6 weeks of growth, then they'll reach this point, this nice deep color. It's beyond the point of eating, but this is the point that we want to cut it open and collect the fully mature seeds. The process for saving seed is pretty easy, very basic. Let's go inside and I'll show you what's involved. I'm ready to start harvesting the seeds from these big, beautiful, fully ripe cucumbers. And on the surface, it's pretty simple. We're just going to cut this open and then scoop out the seeds. But what we do with the seeds at that point, well, you've got a couple different options, and I'll show you those options. So let's begin by just cutting the cucumber in half. And the skin is going to be tougher than you're used to in a cucumber. And you can expect that there's going to be a lot more moisture inside this cucumber as well. In fact, it's very wet. Now I'm going to be saving in this jar. So I'll just scoop out these seeds into the jar, and you can see all of that liquid and how easy this process is. You need to dig in a little bit because there will be seeds hiding underneath the cut. You could cut the cucumber in quarters, but with a little bit of digging, I think cutting it in half is really all you need. And I'll go ahead after scooping these out and work on the other half. Now, as easy as this is, the most important factor when we're saving the seeds is to only save the seeds of open pollinated cucumber variety. So this is a Boston pickling cucumber, an heirloom. That means I can sow these seeds next year and expect to get Boston pickling cucumber plants. If you save the seeds from a hybrid cucumber, you're not going to get a plant that is true to the parentage. You can save the seeds from a supermarket cucumber, but chances are it's not going to be ripe enough for the seeds to be viable, and it's probably also going to be a hybrid, which means if you plant those seeds, there's no telling what plant you're going to get. When we collect and save our garden seeds, they fall into two basic categories: dry seeds and wet seeds. And so those flower seeds that you'll pluck off when they've dried out and sprinkle around the garden, Well, they dry naturally on the plant. Those are dry seeds. But seeds from fruit, like cucumbers and tomatoes, that are residing in this wet environment, well, these wet seeds need a couple extra steps when it comes to drying them and saving them. The seed itself is usually encased in a gel in these wet type of seeds. And that gel usually has a germination inhibitor. Otherwise, all of these seeds would already be sprouting in this warm, wet environment. So we have to get rid of that gel. And there's a couple ways to do that. One being fermentation. So I'm going to go ahead and take this jar, add about 1/2 inch of water, and then just set it aside for a few days. This is a pretty thick mixture with all that gel, so I'll add a little bit of water just to thin it out, and now I'll set it off to the side. While that liquid begins to ferment, I'll go ahead and show you another option as we harvest the seeds from this cucumber. Instead of letting the seeds ferment, and that's a good way to remove the gel around the seeds, now we're going to put the seeds directly onto a paper towel and a paper plate. By doing this, we're going to let the paper of the plate and the towel absorb the moisture, which is actually going to cause the seed to stick to the paper towel and the plate a bit. And that's going to cause the gel to dry out and then actually stick to the plate and the paper towel during the drying of these seeds. So the seeds are out of the cucumbers. Let's go ahead and move these to the table and let the drying begin. You can see how wet these seeds are, and you can see all of the gel that's really fully enclosing these seeds. This is what we want to get rid of, and so I'll spread these out, giving them as much space as possible to dry. And we'll give them a couple days and then come back and check on them. With the magic of video, it's been about a week since I put those seeds on the plate. Since then, I've harvested the seeds from the fermentation jar and allowed those others to begin drying. So let me back up a little bit and show you how I dealt with those fermented seeds. After about 3 or 4 days, you'll probably notice that there's mold growing on the top, and we'll want to remove this. I'll go ahead and add some water to the jar. This helps all that mold float to the top. Then I'll just spoon it out. There still are a lot of solids in this jar, and so now I'll spoon out a lot of that cucumber material and pour off the water. And I'll just repeat this process, pouring off the solids from the cucumber pulp and leaving seeds behind. Now, the most viable seeds will sink to the bottom of the jar, and so some of these that are floating on the top may not be viable. So if I lose some of these smaller seeds, it's okay, but I'm trying to save as many of the seeds as possible. So after repeating this process 3 or 4 times, getting most of the pulp out of the jar, now I'll take a mesh strainer, pour the seeds in, give them a rinse, and these seeds are ready for drying. And now I'll just dump the seeds out on a sheet of parchment paper and spread the seeds to begin air drying. The fermentation process removes all of the gel around the seeds. So when I lay those seeds out to dry, they actually dry pretty quickly. About 4 days fermenting and 3 days drying is all I do, and they're ready for storage. The unfermented seeds, however, take much longer to dry. So I give them a full week for that gel to dry and for the seeds to be ready to store. The fermented seeds aren't sticking at all to this parchment paper. So they're ready to put into storage right away. Whereas the seeds that were on the paper plate and the paper towels, you can see they're actually sticking. So I need to separate them out before I add them to my jars for storage. As you start separating them from this surface that they dried on, you may note that some of the seeds are nice and plump. These are the ones that are going to be viable, and these are the ones I'm going to save. And you may note that some of them are small and sunken. And actually, if you push against these seeds, any kind of pressure at all, they're just going to dissolve. These are not viable. So not only do I separate the seeds from the plate, but I'm also separating them so that I'm only setting aside these nice plump seeds for saving. And so with these seeds separated and removed from the paper towel, I'm going to go ahead and mix them together. It's not that big a deal. They actually came from 2 different cucumbers, but it's a Boston pickling cucumber seed. And I'm not that worried that some of these seeds aren't viable and they're left behind, because I've got dozens of seeds here just from a couple cucumbers, and it's way more plants than I'm going to be able to plant in one season. So I could easily do this with just 1 cucumber and have all of the plants I need next season, but I wanted you to see a couple different ways of doing it. And then I have a jar. I really like saving in jars, but you could save in an envelope. You can actually save in a plastic bag. As long as the seeds are completely dry, it's not as important when it comes to choosing a container. I like these little jars because I found that they're really easy to store. They don't take up much space. And when I'm not saving a lot of seed, these little jars are perfect for the amount I'm saving. So the seeds are in the jar, labeled jar. And now I can just set these aside and wait until next year to grow these cucumber seeds. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.